all the studies. The stuff you have to learn here is so valuable. This stuff is so huge in my thinking. And now we're down to 17 minutes. There's just no way we can cover all this, and this is just unbelievably incredible stuff. So we'll just do the best we can.
Can we extend it a week?
Yeah.
Well, it's okay with me.
Yeah. Yes, please.
All right, so we'll do some more of this next week then.
As chairman of the congregation, I respectfully request to extend it 1 week.
I think we ought to go to
There it is. I think we need to gavel.
Next week you can do a brief overview of what we covered this week, just to fill the people in who are here.
Okay, well we'll do that then. Okay. Well, I don't know if you still have your little timeline maps. Good, some of you have them, that's good. So you may recall that I guess we didn't meet last week because we had the voters meeting. So 2 weeks ago when we met, we were looking at the age of Lutheran orthodoxy. Remember that? Remember what Lutheran orthodoxy is? Orthodoxy means right teaching. It's the correct teaching. And they break it down in our map. There's the golden age of Lutheran Orthodoxy, the high age of Lutheran Orthodoxy, the silver age of, I don't know what those all mean actually, to be honest, I'm not sure. But I do understand that age of Lutheran Orthodoxy and how that came in. And so you can see how it became necessary. We talked, for example, 3 weeks ago about the the formula of Concord. How you had these Lutheran doctors, but after Luther died, then issues would start to arise, and this group would start teaching that, and other guy would start teaching something else, and you have to say, well, is that biblical or not? Or is that Lutheran or not? Or is that the right way to say it or not? And so what the formula of Concord did was dig into it according to the Bible and come out with the correct unbiblical understanding and say, this is what we believe and this is what we're against. And because of that, made it very, very clear. But as you can imagine, what happens? That starts going on to deeper and deeper iterations, doesn't it? And you start looking at things, you have to clarify, you have to make it clear, but you start getting closer and closer and closer. And so I can remember when I was even at Luther Seminary, so this was in the ELCA seminary, but I had a marvelous history professor there. And one of the things he did was he had 3 columns. And then the first column, I can't remember what the particular item was, but it was some item from the Apostles' Creed. And in the second column, then he had something that was written in the formula of Concord about the creed. So as you can guess, in the first column, it was just like a sentence. In the second column, it was half a page long. And then in the third column, it was something by one of the Lutheran Orthodox dogmaticians, what they had written about that topic. And it filled like the whole page, with ellipses before and after, would have gone on for dozens of pages. It was so huge. And maybe this is why I liked him, I guess, because he said, what does this tell you? And the whole class was silent. Nobody said a word. And he wasn't going to he was not going to give us the answer until somebody said something. He just stood there and stared at us. So I finally ventured the answer, and I got it right. So maybe that's why I liked him as a professor. But I said, what starts out as a simple statement of faith gets clarified a lot more. And then it gets clarified a lot more where it's just becoming so long and drawn out that it just goes into so much detail that the simplicity and the beauty of it as a statement of faith is almost getting lost in all of these details. Kenstedt was one of the Lutheran dogmaticians, and his stuff is really good. He gets quoted a lot in Pieper, who was a huge help to me later when I left the ELCA. But one of my professors had Kenstedt's book on on Lutheran dogmatics, a copy from the 17th century. So very valuable. But no kidding, he had it up on a special stand and everything. I'm not kidding. It's this big. The book from the 1600s or 1700s. I can't recall. 1600s, I think. But it's huge. And it just goes in, I think it was in Latin, and it goes into all this detail and complexity. And is that important? Yes. We've seen already, we see in the Bible how you've got to get the faith right. It's the most important thing. You've got to get the faith right. And yet, as you're getting into all that detail, same thing happens in the church as happens here, right? There's fewer and fewer becoming a Sunday school. Why? This is too complicated for people. They don't want this. They give me something simple. I don't want to work my brain too hard on Sunday morning. And so they needed something that was more from the heart. Ah, yes. And so something developed in the history of Lutheranism called the period of Lutheran pietism. And if you look at your little timeline, the second line there, the 1600s, you see there in 1675 where Lutheran pietism enters the church. And then in the next line, in the 1700s, the very first thing there is from 1700 to 1742. That's the height of pietism, when it really took root. And then going down the line after 1750, pietism's influence continues. So what was pietism all about? Well, as Lutheran orthodoxy took root, the services, the worship services and the practices of the Lutheran faith started to feel to people kind of cold. So you can empathize with this, right? Go into church, you go through the motions, you do this, you do that. The pastor gets up and reads a sermon that he wrote that week, which is very profoundly theologically correct. And the service is over, and everybody goes home, and it's not affecting people's lives. It's not changing anyone. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. It's just, it feels like going through the motions, right? And so Lutheran pietism was a renewal of this idea that the faith should touch our hearts as well, that we should be, that a life with Jesus should be inner and meaningful. We've talked already in this class about what makes good hymns. One thing is that they should be objectively true. They need to have objective doctrine and truth. But they should also be subjective. It should reflect our life of faith in those things, right? Lutheran pietism was a strong move over to the subjective side. It started in many ways with a fellow named Philip Jakob Spener. And this was one of his big books, Pia Desideria. And he started seeing this and preaching this. And let me just give you a few of the ideas that come out of Spener's book. And I should give you a heads up on this, because I don't want to lead you down the primrose path. I am influenced by pietism. And there's a lot of things I like about pietism. And there are a lot of LCMS pastors who would love to slap me in the face right now just for saying that. Because pietism is seen as an enemy of the Lutheran faith. And so when we look in a few weeks at how confessional Lutheranism had a resurgence, one of the things we'll see is some of the negative effects of pietism. So as much as I believe that there's a lot of great things about it, a lot of positive things about it, there are also underlying some really negative things that resulted from it. And that's why eventually, as much as I'm still influenced by Pietism, as much as I still like it, I became Missouri Synod, which would not describe itself as Lutheran Pietist. It would describe itself as confessional Lutheran. And that's what I believe, that's where I stand. But I just want you to see right up front that the things I'm talking about, there's going to be complexity here. That's why this is going to be a good class, I think. There's a lot to this. And I'll talk about some of the ways in which this plays out, well, which has played out in my life and which it may have in your life or in your observations, right? So here's 6 things that Spener points out in his book, which are very interesting. So he talks about the earnest and thorough study of the Bible in private meetings, little churches within the church. In other words, he was a big believer that you don't just come to church on Sunday, that you should be in your daily life engaged in Bible study in small groups. So host a Bible study in your home. Get together with fellow Christians where you're growing in your faith together. The word for that eventually came to be called conventicles. I didn't know that when I was younger, but it became what's called conventicles, where you're not just coming to church on Sunday, but you're meeting with fellow Christians off-site, away from the church, challenging each other in your faith, growing in your faith, studying the Bible. Now, that was an important influence on me because guess what? We had a conventicle in my house. No one ever called it that. No one even knew what the word meant, I'm sure. But when I was a teenager, there was a group of people in the LCMS church where I met that experienced like a renewal of faith. And then we started getting together. And we sometimes met in different homes, but very often we met in my home. My mom and dad hosted it. And we would get together. There was no pastor there. That's why you can see why the conservatives are starting to worry, right? You know, what's being taught here. And we would sing. We had little songbooks. And we would sing together. And people would share what's going on in their lives. And sometimes they'd share testimonies of what they thought God was doing in their life and in their family. And then somebody would teach a lesson from the Bible. And then we would pray. We would pray for each other. And it was really I got way more out of those meetings than going to church on Sunday and you do page 15 or page 5 and blah, 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 go through the motions, right? I got way more out of it. It's just out of curiosity. You're not a tape, I am. My neck's on the line. Anybody ever part of a group like that? Yeah, several. Good. Okay, so
It's part of a Bible study in somebody's house.
Something of what that is, yeah. Very powerful force for strengthening your faith. And so Spener believed that that's what they should be doing. And so they started then, with his influence, people started doing that. Started meeting in homes and growing together. And what happens to them? They get on fire for the faith. They get excited about it. It's not just going through the motions on Sunday. It becomes part of their everyday life, and they see their fellow Christians and they know what's happening in their lives and they're praying for each other and exhorting each other. A second thing, the Christian priesthood being universal, the laity should share in the spiritual government of the church. So the priesthood of all believers, where did that come from? Well, that's from Luther. That's Lutheran. And so Spener's saying the priesthood of all believers means that you shouldn't have the pastor up there in a black robe and a special white tie thing telling everybody what to do, and he's the only one that can teach anything or do anything or say anything. He has all the authority. The people should be involved and engaged in it. Sounds good too, doesn't it? Third, a knowledge of Christianity must be attended by the practice of it as its indispensable sign and supplement. In other words, it's not enough to go to confirmation and you memorize the small catechism and you can recite and you know all these things about the church doctrine, but you're not living it out in a real and practical way in your day-to-day life. This is something that should be lived, your lived experience being a Christian. 4, instead of merely didactic and often bitter attacks on the heterodox and unbelievers, a sympathetic and kindly treatment of them. So we talked, I think, was it 2 weeks ago or whatever, about the difference between orthodox and heterodox. Orthodox are those who believe rightly. Heterodox are those who have the wrong belief, a different kind of belief. And so much of Lutheran orthodoxy then becomes pointing out the errors and the flaws in heterodoxy, right? That's what we do. That's in the Lutheran confessions. That's a huge part of the Formula of Concord. As soon as you say, this is what we believe, and then you say, that's why we're against this and this and this, that's great for the clarity. That's great for getting down to the details of what it is that we believe. And I do it too. You know me. I'm not ashamed or afraid to get up in the pulpit and say, this is why the Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong, or where the Baptists are wrong, or where the Catholics are wrong. Or, you have to do that. That's the whole history of heresy, is that you clarify what's right by pointing out what's wrong. But what is people's initial reaction to that? People don't like it. Why can't we be just positive? Why do we have to be so negative about someone else? Why do we have to talk bad about other Christians? Can't we just be positive and talk about what we believe, right? That's our natural reaction. So it's very challenging, and Spener's looking at this and saying, it's one thing to call attention to the people who are wrong, but why do we have to be so hard on them? Why do we have to be, what comes across as so bitter? And sometimes the Lutheran orthodoxy comes across that way, doesn't it? It's really, these people are, that influenced me too. I'm just digging a hole for myself. Somebody's going to talk. I'm going to get a heresy trial here for sure. But being in the Navy is what shaped this. So for example, the doctrine of the Lord's Supper. I can see where we disagree in a huge way with the Catholics. I can see where we disagree in a huge way with the Zwinglians. People think it's just a symbol. It's not just bread. It's just bread and wine. Nothing different. But you know, I always felt like we were pretty close to the Reformed. I would say it's the real presence. And my Presbyterian brother in Christ that I became good friends with would say, I believe in the real presence of the body and blood of Christ too. Wow. Now, I'm a good theologian, I really am. And I know how to ask the right questions and get to the details. And you ask the right questions. So, are you eating the bread of the body and blood of Christ? Are you putting it in your mouth? No, we're not doing that. It's just spiritual. So it is different. We do believe differently. But I still feel like he's pretty close. You know, we're pretty close. We should be able to talk to each other. We should be able to encourage each other and discuss this. And the way often confessional and Orthodox Lutheranism handles this is, they're wrong! we have to exclude them. So you see Spener's heart here? Why he's doing this? Oh, my time is going so fast. Fifth, a reorganization of the theological training of the universities, giving more prominence to the devotional life. So when you're training a pastor, what do? Do you send him for 4 years and you fill his brain with tons and tons and tons of doctrine so he knows everything correctly? Or do you help him to encourage a devotional life where he also spends time in prayer, where he spends time reading the Word for his own enrichment, where he spends time considering his discipleship? What's the way to train our pastors? And sixth, then, a different style of preaching, namely in the place of pleasing rhetoric, the implanting of Christianity in the inner or new man, the soul of which is faith and its effects, the fruits of life. So instead of getting up there and quoting poems from 500 years ago and having nice theological dictums that are kind of laid out? Is the pastor's sermon really driving at your heart to stir in you faith in Christ? So you see what's going on in Spener and what's happening. You see why that appeals to people, pietism. And so pietism was very concerned about having a change of heart. That you really need to live this Christianity. It needs to be born out in your life. And I'll probably get into it next week then some more if we're going to spend an extra week on this. But you can see then some of the challenges of it too, and why confessional Lutheranism had a problem with it. Because the more you get over to the subjective side, you start to lose the objective elements of the faith, which is where it really becomes critical. I got so much to cover here that I just can't pull it all together. But I would like to, that's not going to work either.
Well, that's what next week is for.
Yeah, we got another week.
Yeah.
Yeah, according to the bulletin, there's another week after that too. You got 2 weeks maybe.
2 weeks.
Oh.
Let's look at one song then. So, some songs from pietism did make their way. George, it's going to be different than the one I told you. I'm throwing you a curve.
3, 4?
It is 3, 4, yes.
Poor George. Poor George, yeah.
So, although pietism is looked down upon by confessional Lutheranism, there are still some things that emerge out of pietism that are good and that can be affirmed, I think should be affirmed. And so I'm glad that some of their hymnody also made it into our hymns as well. So we're going to just look at one for right now today. Would you turn to 797?
We're going to sure have to roll with pastors, I'm telling you.
Yeah. You never know what to expect with me, George. It's just like my poor wife. I think we'll just do one verse.
Just roll your eyes, George.
But if you look down, okay, see the text of this hymn? This is coming from, you see it, Johann Daniel Hernschmidt, 1675 to 1723, so that's in the era of Lutheran pietism. And Philip Jakob Spener, I don't know if he went there and changed it or if he helped to start it. I think he started a university in Germany at Halle. So the University of Halle, H-A-L-L-E, that became in Germany the center for Lutheran pietism. That was where it was strongest and where it was taught profoundly, and the people that went out from there, we'll look at that some more next week, they sent out, that's where the concern for missionaries grew, and they started to say, we need to send people around the world to tell others about Jesus. Halle was the center for Lutheran pietism, and Hernschmidt was a pietist at Halle. So this hymn by Hernschmidt is then really a pietist hymn, isn't it? And yet it's so beautiful that it made it into our hymnal, and I'm really glad it did. And you notice too, it's in that 3/4 time. See how that started to change? Because that's more fun to sing, right? In many ways. Dun 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 dun. You're gonna get excited about that. You can't get excited about dun 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 dun. You need dun 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 dun. Right? Am I right, George? Yeah. So this is a hymn. If you don't know it, give some thought to it. This is powerful. But what I want you to notice as you're singing is how strong the subjective component is, right? The objective component is there. It's sound theology, or it wouldn't have made it into that LSB. But strong, look what he's talking to in the first line. Praise the Almighty, my soul. Who's he talking to?
Himself.
Himself, yeah. Praise you. Praise the Lord, you dummy. Praise the Lord. Yeah, I will laud him, right? And with anthems, I come before him as long as he allows me breath, right? So you see that strong, subjective, pietist element in here. But let's sing one verse of it. Can we do that, George? And then that'll close us for today. I'm glad you gave me permission to extend this. We've got a lot more to cover on this topic that's really important and good. Okay, shall we sing this? There's a lot of interesting things we'll glean out of this, and stuff that applies to us, and stuff that will help clarify for you why we believe what we believe, and why it's important. Thank you for coming. Thank you for bearing with me.
I'm on the wrong side of the church.